Good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. We today are going to talk about the interaction of cycles. So this is one of your written assignments, and sometimes we kind of look over this because of it being a written assignment, so it takes a little bit more time. So we're going to go over the 3 different cycles that you need to focus on, as well as some pointers for writing a good response for this. So again, my name is Christina Getby, and today's the 12th of January. So we'll go ahead and get started. Maybe. All right, so again, we are going to talk about the interaction of cycles and hopefully try to keep that on 15 minutes. We're going to do question and answers if there's any over the different cycles that we talked about. Also talking about some study skills, again, focusing on writing tips, and then some overall questions and answers if there are any. Please don't hesitate to participate. You can always answer questions by using your microphone or sending a little chat. Please pay attention to your surroundings. If it gets noisy, please mute your microphone so it cuts down the distractions for everyone. Also, these sessions, if you have to duck out early, are recorded and then posted on the American Academy YouTube channel. And I went ahead and included the link for that. Okay, so first things first, we need to know what carbon is. So carbon is a very interesting element. It's located on the periodic table as well as all the other elements. And you can see where it is. See, it's right here. Okay, blowing up that block of the periodic table, we can see that the symbol for carbon is a capital C. The atomic number for carbon is 6, and the atomic mass is 12.01. We can also, from this information, say that carbon has 4 valence electrons. I love the periodic table. I really do. It tells us so much information about the different elements that are involved in our day-to-day life, especially carbon. Carbon is needed for almost every process. And so again, we can look, and carbon is right in this group. It is in group 14. And so from the location on the periodic table, it tells us that carbon has 4 valence electrons. Now, every single one of these elements wants to bond, whether they want to give their electrons away or take some more electrons. The only elements that don't want to do that is this group 18. Those are the noble gases. They're kind of on their own. So right in the middle here, we have carbon. Carbon has 4. And the main goal of every element, except the noble gases, is to have 8 valence electrons, to have a full outer shell. So carbon is in the unique position where it can actually share. So it's right in the middle of those 8. It might be more energy to give those 4 electrons away. It might be more energy to take on 4 more electrons. So most generally, common compounds are formed by carbon forming covalent bonds, meaning that it will share those 4 valence electrons. So carbon is made from stars. It's got a very interesting origin that I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than what you are expected to know, but I found it fascinating, so I really couldn't stop. So again, carbon is made from our stars. And so when nuclear fission, it happens within our stars and the sun, it will create helium nuclei. And these are created by protons. Okay, and remember, nuclear fusion is where I fuse the two things together. So taking extreme heat, extreme energy, I am fusing two things together. Okay, so with that being said, it's going to create helium nuclei and many of these. So once the star produces enough helium, carbon is then created, which it sounds super easy, but when carbon is created, it takes another set of nuclear reactions called the triple alpha process. Again, more information than you need, but it might help you understand the process a little bit more. Okay, so a couple of pictures that I saw and that I found. All right, so these red circles are protons, okay? And so the protons that are formed in the helium nuclei are going to keep multiplying until we have carbon. Okay, so again, here's another way to look at it. So helium, we had two protons and two neutrons, and together with another helium nuclei plus gamma ray. Gamma ray is, again, tons of energy. We will create a beryllium nuclei. Well, beryllium is not quite carbon, so we need to add another helium nuclei, and then that will create our carbon. So again, a lot of nuclear reactions. It's pretty amazing when you break down all the activity that has to happen for one carbon atom. And again, please don't worry about knowing all that information. I included it because I was hopeful in it helping you understand how we get carbon, okay? So again, carbon typically forms covalent bonds. And again, those are sharing the electrons, those outermost electrons with another element, typically carbon. So those covalent bonds are going to give us common compounds that we're familiar with. We are familiar with carbon dioxide. We're familiar with carbon monoxide, one carbon atom and one oxygen atom. We should be familiar with carbon tetrachloride. We use that in the fire extinguishers that we should have. And then we are familiar with methane, one carbon atom bonded with 4 hydrogen atoms. Also, things that we are familiar with are naturally occurring forms of carbon. We have graphite that we can find, and we have diamonds. Diamonds are, again, a natural form of carbon. All right, let's start with the carbon cycle. Carbon is, again, essential for life. Okay, carbon is very important to the atmosphere and the abiotic and biotic factors. It is what makes Earth, Earth, okay? Carbon is being cycled through the hydrosphere, which is our water systems, the lithosphere, which is our land, and the troposphere, which is the layer of atmosphere that we are currently living in. In other words, it's going to be recycled and cycled through the earth, the atmosphere, and the living and dead things. So remember, if it's a cycle, it is continually repeating itself, and we'll talk about how it can go different directions within the cycle, which makes it even more unique. Okay, here is a picture I found that I believe it was included in your lesson for biology. This shows the carbon cycle. And again, it can be a little overwhelming, but if you take it step by step, it makes a lot of sense. So first things first, we get our carbon from our sun and other stars, okay? Then the plants, all the living plants, are going to take in that carbon as in the form of carbon dioxide. The trees are going to take that in, and what comes out is some organic carbon. It's going to release oxygen. So the organic compound is going to be needed for animals. Okay? Then the animal respiration is going to release that carbon dioxide back in the atmosphere. We have also, we can get carbon from dead organisms and waste products. Okay? When an organism dies and starts to decay, it does emit carbon dioxide, which then we get the fossil fuels. Okay, then we can continue our cycle over to root respiration, and then we can have some emissions from the auto and factories from burning fossil fuels, and then we can go to the cycle again. Again, there's lots of different directions that the carbon can take, but it all leads to the same outcome. So let's start with plants. Plants are going to pull that carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they're going to make it to use food. Now, a misconception is that it's like the plant food that you can buy at Walmart. Not exactly. So what happens is the plants are going to pull the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And they're going to, again, perform a chemical reaction to keep that carbon for itself. The carbon then becomes a part of that plant as it's stored food. So again, the sunlight comes into the plant. The plant is going to take in carbon dioxide and then release oxygen after it's finished with its process. Then the animals are going to come along and eat the plants. So when organisms are going to consume plants, they're going to take in carbon in the form of carbohydrates and proteins. This is where we have cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is going to then add oxygen to these carbohydrates and proteins in the cells to provide energy for the day. Animals, including humans, need a certain amount of energy to make it through the day. So we need to have a certain amount of carbohydrates and proteins within our cells to create our everyday life. Then when we exhale, we are going to release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere for more plants to take. The decomposition of plants and animals. Again, when animals and plants are going to die, bacteria will decompose or break down. Decompose is just a fancy word for breaking down. And so bacteria is going to break down the organic material into carbon dioxide and methane. Both of those two gases are then going to be released back into the atmosphere. Sometimes we have bodies, whether they're dinosaurs or different plant waste, some bodies are not going to fully decompose or break down. Then they're going to end up as underground deposits of carbon, such as fossil fuels. Okay, carbon is then found in rocks and underground deposits. And when we have those underground deposits or rocks, it is going to be the carbon is going to be released very slowly into the atmosphere. The result then is carbon being stored on Earth in some active pools and some relatively inactive pools. And the only thing that makes a pool active versus inactive is how fast the carbon is being released. Carbon is also found in the oceans. In fact, the oceans contain Earth's largest reservoir of carbon. Carbon is absorbed by photoplankton. Photoplankton are going to take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then when they die, they are going to settle on the ocean floor. Carbon is also found in the form of calcium carbonate in the shells of aquatic organisms. again, when these animals die or these organisms die, the carbon substances are going to be deposited at the bottom of the ocean. Therefore, we have carbon being stored in our ocean. The problem is people have located that carbon and started drilling. So again, we're at a limited amount of that carbon being stored in the ocean. So human impact, we can impact this carbon cycle by releasing carbon in the form of fossil fuels. And when we burn, it releases additional carbon into the atmosphere. Now, sometimes this additional release of carbon isn't necessarily a bad thing. When volcanoes erupt, they release carbon into the atmosphere. So it's not all human impact. When we release additional carbon into the atmosphere, there's an increased amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And this is responsible for releasing global warming, or increasing global warming, I'm sorry. When we cut down forests and remove a lot of plants, that means that less carbon dioxide is being taken in from those plants. And so less carbon dioxide is being removed from the atmosphere. Okay, I found this video interesting. And again, it can be a little overwhelming and it takes a minute to fully understand, but I thought it was very interesting. So there's a carbon cycle in Olympus forest, okay? So we have the sun giving off carbon, okay? So now this carbon dioxide can be used for photosynthesis, okay? So it's the green circles that are following through. So the green circles will either go to animal and plant respiration, so animals and plants breathing, if you will. Also, the carbon dioxide released from photosynthesis or used in photosynthesis, some of it could go to the water systems, the oceans, okay? And some of the carbon will simply just fall into tree litter and biomass. All right, so once we have animals breathing, then we have some more carbon dioxide being released, okay? The carbon dioxide is going to represent these clear or white circles, if you will, that are moving. So we will give off some carbon dioxide from breathing, as well as burning of fossil fuels. A forest fire will also release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as well. So it kind of shows how it is always moving, obviously, but there's not one clear set of steps that carbon has to follow. Another diagram that I saw, this one is a little less complicated. So if we have CO2 within the atmosphere, okay, CO2, carbon dioxide, one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms bonded together gives us CO2. So the CO2 is removed from the atmosphere from the plants by photosynthesis. It's somewhat breathing in those carbon dioxide molecules. Then we have our animals that are going to come along and feed on those plants. Then those animals are going to take some of that carbon dioxide and either breathe it all back out into the atmosphere or take it on to the next step by dying and decomposing. When an animal either exhales, again, it's going to release the carbon dioxide. And when it dies and starts to decompose, it will also release the carbon dioxide back in the atmosphere. One other way is plant decomposition. So again, the plants will use photosynthesis to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But then when a plant starts to break down and decompose, it will also release some of that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. So again, I thought this diagram was really a good depiction of the carbon cycle, not as confusing as the one prior with the moving circles. Okay, so here's a short video that's going to kind of put it all back into kind of reviewing all of it. So let's go. Oops, I'm so sorry.
Carbon is an element that is crucial to every living organism. It is also a key component of our atmospheric air, and it cycles through our earth, the ocean, biotic factors, abiotic factors, in the air constantly. Carbon recycles among 5 major locations for influence. These items include the atmosphere, the terrestrial biosphere, the Earth's interior, the ocean, and human influence. Let's take a look at what happens at each of these items or influence. Carbon is found in the atmosphere in at least 2 forms, carbon dioxide and methane. This atmospheric carbon can be absorbed by autotrophs like plants and plankton to be used for photosynthesis. It can also be absorbed by bodies of water in the ocean. When carbon is absorbed by the ocean, it reacts with the water and creates carbonic acid. The terrestrial biosphere, which is another term for the Earth's land, has several paths for carbon. First, there is an exchange between plants and animals. Plants absorb carbon for photosynthesis, and the animals release carbon during cellular respiration. Also, heterotrophs eat plants that contain carbon. Animals also release carbon as methane during digestion, and soil contains decomposers that release carbon into the atmosphere and the soil. Carbon is also stored in the Earth's interior. Carbon in the lithosphere includes fossil fuels like coal, oil, natural gas, and deposits like limestone. Volcanoes may release some of this carbon stored in the lithosphere. Up next is the ocean. The ocean has the greatest exchange of cycled carbon and stores a large amount of carbon. The ocean absorbs carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. The ocean also has a large amount of plankton that absorb carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. Humans also influence the movement of carbon. Humans burn fossil fuels which release carbon into the atmosphere by combustion. Also, the production of clinker, which is used for cement from limestone, also releases carbon into the atmosphere. In addition, deforestation from humans can increase the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So there we go, an overview of the path of an atom of carbon that it may take during the carbon cycle. Thanks for watching. Math uploads new math and science video every week. Please subscribe and share.
Okay, so I am sure that that image that he used to describe the route that carbon molecules can take looked familiar because it was from another writing assignment that you had in biology. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so let's focus now on photosynthesis because your assignment interaction of cycles asked you to look at carbon cycle, photosynthesis, and cellular respiration. So let's focus on photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a very complex process. So let's begin. All living things are going to respire or breathe, okay? And release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So when we breathe in and breathe out, we are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. A plant needs three things to conduct photosynthesis: carbon dioxide, water, and energy from sun or light. We have carbon dioxide, the first necessity, is going to enter the plant through tiny holes on the leaves, the flowers, the stems, and the roots. Those tiny holes on the leaves are called stomata, and they literally are openings on the leaf for the gas interaction. So carbon dioxide is going to enter the plant through the stomata, through those tiny holes. Then we have water being absorbed through the roots. So those are the first two things that a plant needs. The last thing is going to be the sun or a light that's going to give the plant that energy to create a chemical reaction. That chemical reaction is going to break down and kind of rearrange the molecules. I have the equation for photosynthesis right here. And again, it looks very overwhelming, but trust me, it's not. So the three necessities for photosynthesis: we have carbon dioxide, we have water, we have energy. We already talked about those. So when you add carbon dioxide, water, and light energy, you are going to produce sugar and oxygen. Okay, so again, that chemical reaction is going to take the three necessities and rearrange it so we have the food or the glucose that a plant needs, plus the oxygen as a quote unquote waste. So here we have a diagram. Again, we have the light energy, we have the carbon dioxide entering the plant through those tiny holes called the stomata. We have water being absorbed up through the roots. And then, again, the light energy is going to give the plant the energy it needs to create a chemical reaction. And the chemical reaction is going to form sugar as well as oxygen. Oops, I'm sorry. Here again is the equation, and it does look pretty overwhelming. However, once you start breaking it down, it's pretty simple. So in review, the things that are needed for the reaction are to the left of the arrow. We have the carbon dioxide, water, and light energy. That's going to be represented in the equation by the 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O plus light energy. Then the output of the photosynthesis is going to be to the right of the arrow. It's not an equal sign because it doesn't equal, it's going to yield or produce glucose, which is C6H12 oxygen, or C6H12O6, that's glucose or the sugar, plus 6 oxygen molecules. Okay? The output of the reaction, again, is the glucose that the plant needs to support itself and oxygen. The plant's either going to use the glucose or the sugar right away or store it as energy. So it could use that stored energy when it is producing fruit or when it's producing its flowers. The oxygen is then released through those tiny holes in the leaves called stomata, where the carbon dioxide entered the plant. So those tiny holes are going to be useful in the quote unquote breathing of the plant.